know where I'm coming from the very beginning. I have been a resident in Hood County since 1992, and I've been a resident of the Granbury Independent School District since that time. My wife was an employee of the school district for 5 years. I myself have never been an employee of the school district in a full-time sense. I did some independent contract work for them, recruiting teachers when I first came here. So I have had that association from an employment standpoint with Granbury ISD. I was part of the strategic planning committee and the bond proposal committee that was responsible for producing the bond election that we had in November. At that particular time, I had a position that I was pretty much in favor of what the district was trying to do. I will admit to you that by the time we got to the end of that whole planning process, I had begun to have some concerns about it, but my attitude was, having invested all this time and all this work in this, let's let the public have a chance to weigh in on it. So it went forward, and as you well know, it was defeated by the narrowest of margins. At that particular point, I began to weigh in my own mind, why is it that this failed, especially after all the work and time and effort and energy that went into it. And as we go through this thing, I think you will see where my change of mind came to play on this particular bond election that we have that's being presented to us at this time. Now, I have heard from more than one source that there are people that are concerned about my background and my experience that give me any kind of position to even talk about this. So I'm going to share with you briefly my career in education, and you can decide for yourself whether anything I have to say has any weight or not. I worked in education for more than 30 years. I was a classroom teacher for 9 years. I was an assistant principal for 2 years. I was a principal for 2 years. I was a personnel director, and I was the executive director of secondary education. Those experiences came in 4 different school districts: the Houston Independent School District, the Channelview Independent School District, and the Aldine Independent School District. And then lastly, my superintendency came in Thorndale ISD. Now, Aldine, I was there for 16 years. I was the executive director of secondary education, which meant that I had responsibility for 5 high schools and 8 middle schools. During that particular period of time that I worked there, we passed bond elections and built 1 new high school and 3 new middle schools. There were 50,000 students in that school district, and that was my responsibility for more than a decade. I took the superintendency in Thorndale ISD in 1987. That's a small school district. It's exceedingly small by comparison to Aldine, and very small by comparison to Granbury. One thing I can say about superintendencies in small school districts, you learn a little bit of something about everything because you don't have a cadre of assistant superintendents to support you in what you're trying to do. And we attempted a bond election while I was in the superintendency there. I took that job and came on duty in July of 1987. In October of 1987, TEA sent us a letter saying, you are out of compliance with the requirements for 22-to-1 student ratio in elementary schools, grades 1 to 4. We're going to give you a waiver, but you've got to present us a plan as to how it is you're going to solve this problem. I'd been there less than 4 months at the time that took place. I got together my 2 principals and my business manager, and we sat down and looked at the resources that we had, and we tried to figure out what can we do about this. In November, I went to the board with a 3-option consideration. We can try to return an old building that had been abandoned for school purposes, but was right on the same campus as everything else, had 6 classrooms in it, but it had been abandoned when they built what they called their new elementary school, and it wasn't in use for school purposes at all. We can try to recapture that and put it back in service. That was one option. Second option, we can buy a couple of, what we determined in our analysis was we needed 4 classrooms in order to get in compliance. So the second option was we'll buy 2 portable buildings with 2 classrooms each in it and put them next to the elementary school and go on. Third option, we can do a bond election to build on to the elementary school the 4 classrooms that we need. The board said, let's try to reclaim the old building. So I went to work, hired structural architects and what have you to tell me what it was going to take and cost to put that building back in use. What I found out was that it was going to cost more to put that building back in use than new construction cost. So the board said, no, we don't want to do that. So that left us with either portable buildings or an addition to the elementary school. The board said, don't want portable buildings on our campus. So we want a bond election. So we put together a bond election to build 4 classroom addition to the elementary school. But the board said, you know, we really want an additional gymnasium here. They only had 1 gymnasium and it was 30-something years old. We really want another gymnasium. So let's do this. Let's present the public a bond proposition that will build us the classrooms we need, and we'll let the gymnasium piggyback itself off of that need. Well, I suggested, hey, let's put them in 2 different proposals. No, they didn't want to do that because they thought that they could get that gym by having people know that they needed those 4 classrooms. What we got was nothing. We got a resounding defeat by the public at that particular time. So the superintendent at that particular point presented them a purchase plan for 2 portable buildings. And we added 2 portable buildings, and when I left there in 1994 to move to Granbury, they were still in that same posture. So they had gotten that far down the road without any additional building program. Now that's basically my credentials to talk to you about this. I've had some experience in dealing with bond elections. Now, there's some things that we're going to talk about that I'm going to talk about, and then hopefully toward the end of this, if you have questions, you'll get an opportunity to ask some questions and interact. But we're going to talk about some things that we need to know. And one of the first things that everybody in this room needs to know is that this election is going to take place at the end of this month and the first part of next month. And if you want to vote early, you will be able to do that on April 22nd through April the 30th. And there are going to be 3 locations where you can vote early. One is out at the Hood County Annex, which I suspect everybody in here pretty much is familiar with that because that's where early voting is for pretty much everything else. There's going to be early voting at Acton Methodist Church, which is about 4 miles or so to the north of here on Fall Creek Highway. And the hours for that early voting, April 22nd through 26th, is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. April 29th and 30th is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The official voting day is on May 4th, and that will be at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and there are 8 or 9 different locations scattered across the county that you will be able to vote in, including the Annex and Acton Methodist Church, Calvary Baptist Church, First Baptist Church, Generations Church, Good Shepherd's Episcopal Church, Lipan Church of Christ, St. Francis Cabrini Catholic Church, and the Pecan Plantation Activity Center. So that everybody needs to know and be aware of. So, now, having said all of that, let's get to the issue of what you really came here to hear about, and that is the bond election that is facing us on May the 4th. There are some things that Granbury ISD wants you to know, and that you need to know. They want you to know that they are proposing a $161.5 million bond election to be decided in one proposal. They want you to know, and they have, if you want to go online and look for this, under their website, you can find multiple pages that tells you all of the things that they are proposing to do at all of the campuses in Granbury. There's quite a laundry list of things that they want to include under that $161.5 million bond election. That is something that they want you to know, that it's every school gets something. Also, they are proposing under that to build a new elementary school, which my understanding is its location will be somewhere in the general vicinity behind HEB on the kind of eastern side of the school district, where they already own land for the purpose of building another school. They want you to know that they want an additional transportation center on the eastern side of the school district to house buses and the transportation services that are needed to move children in this school district. They want you to know that they have a need for a couple of $1 million, about $2.5 million worth of security. Now, they don't tell us what that is to include, but it's under the big heading of security. And they want to buy 30 new buses and 6 new passenger cars. Or, no, it didn't say cars. Passenger vehicles is what it said. They do not tell us the size of the buses, nor do they tell us what a passenger vehicle is. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along here. I think there are some other things that you need to know that aren't covered under the umbrella that I just presented to you. First thing I think any voter needs to know is that with a bond election, that money cannot be spent on maintenance and operation. It has to be spent on capital expenses. But they do not have to spend legally a single cent of what they told you they were going to spend it on. Once you authorize them to have the $161.5 million, they can spend it on any capital expenditure that they want to. Now, they're not going to do that in a really overt kind of way because it's political suicide. But there's nothing legally that requires them to spend that. Now, my experience that I just related to you has taught me that I think there are 4 reasons why school districts enter into bond elections at all. 1 is they have a need. 2, they have some wants. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's monument building. And sometimes it's resume enhancement. So we need to look as voters at the need side of this thing, because presumably we're being told that they need $161.5 million, and they've told you what those needs happen to be. I have a little bit of a problem with accepting the notion that it is a need-based bond election totally. And the reason for that is that in 2022, we had a bond election for $396 million, and the need at that time was a new high school and a big athletic complex. Voters said no 3-1. So in 2023, they came back with another bond election. It was around $151 million. And they said, here's what we need. And they had something for every school in the district, and they had the elementary school, and they had the transportation center. not a cent for the high school. That election failed. Now one has to wonder, if there was a need, how it is that the high school didn't need anything. But that's what it was. My conclusion after sitting in on a good many of these meetings and the Strategic Planning Committee and in the Bond Proposal Committee is that the driving force was, how much money can we get without having to increase the tax rate? I don't know how many times that thing was massaged and moved around in order to try to make sure that they didn't have to raise the tax rate. So, I'm not even going to ask you to excuse me because I'm skeptical that this is a need-based bond election. It more likely some other things thrown in there as well. Now, when you look, and I spent a considerable amount of time wading through all of what they have included under this thing. And we're not going to take your time tonight to try to wade through all of them. If you want to, you can go online and wade through them for yourself. But there are some things in that laundry list of things that are put on this thing that really cause me concern. I'll give you a couple of 3 examples. There is a line item, actually it's the 3rd largest line item they have, for fees, permits, and soft cost. They don't tell you what a soft cost is, but that's things like surveys and drainage plans and things of that nature that they might need. They have a contingency plan, which is the 5th largest item on there. Those fees, permits, and soft costs are around $14 million. The contingency plan is a little over $10 million. Now, you have to have some contingencies, and you are going to have some soft costs. But, folks, that adds up to around $25 million. They're wanting to borrow that money for 30 years. Now, that's just one of the things that caught my eye right off the bat. I want to move down to the security item, which is way down the list under others, where they want $2.5 million for security. Now, nobody in their right mind is going to vote against security for the schools. You'd have to be an idiot to do that. But I do have a question. How is it that we got to here and we're unsafe to the tune of $2.5 million? And I hearkened back to my Thorndale days. The board said, we need these classrooms, but we want this gym. They wouldn't do 2 proposals. They wanted to piggyback one off of the other. My notion is, why didn't we put this security and maybe a couple of other things that were non-negotiables things in one proposal and the rest of all this stuff in another proposal and let the voters have a chance to make that decision? So, under that line is the matter of 30 school buses to the tune of $4,800,000. My calculation says that's $162,000 per school bus. I haven't tried to buy a school bus lately, but I don't know that that's a good or bad price, but that's what they are wanting us to give them permission to do. But the one that really kind of got me was the $450,000 that they wanted for 6 passenger vehicles. And that comes out to $75,000 apiece. Now, if you're buying a 16-passenger van, that's probably not a bad price. But if you're buying an administrator a $75,000 BMW, that's something else. And we don't know what that money's going to be spent on, but they've told you that they need 6 passenger vehicles. Yeah, we won't beat that horse any further. I think we've covered that. And my basic point is we need to look at the needs and the wants, and let's separate them out. Let's get the needs and let's put the wants over here someplace else. There's a second thing that the board wants you to know, and that is that they're not going to increase your tax rate. And that is true. They're not going to increase your tax rate. But as I have said to countless people, to the point of I'm sure I'm boring them with it, people don't spend tax rates. People spend dollars. And they are proposing to increase the indebtedness of this school district with a proposal of $161.5 million. So their promise not to raise your tax rate is based on a couple of very critical assumptions. One is that they can borrow the money for 5%. Now, I haven't tried to borrow that much money lately, but I'm not thinking that that's going to be likely. But the one that really is they're basing this promise on is that they need a growth in the taxable value of property in GISD of $500,000 for 5 consecutive years. No, I'm sorry. It was a growth of $500 million, not I'm always confused by those zeros, but that's there's now they can promise us not to raise the tax rate, and they may be, if they get really lucky, able to keep that promise. I personally doubt it. But what they cannot promise you is what the appraisal district is going to do with you. And they don't control that. And if they're counting on $500 million growth in the appraised value every year for 5 consecutive years, where are they going to get that?
They appoint the members of the appraisal board.
Well, that's true. They do have people on the appraisal board appointed by the board of directors of or trustees of the independent school district. Now, the other thing here that I think that we need to kind of think about is probably not all that significant, but it's highly likely that none of these people are going to be here 30 years from now. What I can tell you is we're going to hear a lot about this is for the kids. The kids that it's for are going to be paying for this, most of them until they're over 40 years of age. So, it really, and this is personal with me, you don't have to agree with me on this at all, but it comes down to an issue of trust. And that's where I came full circle on supporting one bond election to not supporting this one. That it is an issue of trust. And the people that are asking us to trust them with $161 million of our tax money, actually, we'll talk about that figure in just a minute, but it's a board that during the 2.5 years that I've been dealing with the board on other issues, they have passed policy after policy and procedure after procedure to restrict my voice and your voice at the board meetings. have refused to accept no as an answer. They have allowed school property to be used by employees that should have had no right to use that. Now, when this was all brought out in public, what we found out was that there was no accountability for the misuse of that property because the board had not adopted any policies to regulate the use. That is an administrative failure for not presenting policies, and that is a gross misuse of the board's authority by not having a policy to govern that. So, it is a trust issue that has come with me. I have sat in board meetings and watched the superintendent of schools insult one of the board members in public and basically accusing her of not being smart enough to understand what was going on because she asked a question. We have another board member that was censured because she had the audacity to go into the high school library. Never did they present any evidence that she had violated any policy to do that. They just didn't like the fact that she had done it. And so she was censured. Now, that may not mean a thing to you, but it speaks to the trust issue as far as I am concerned. Now, there are some things I think that the board hopes you don't know. We talked about the things they want you to know. We talked about some things that I think you need to know, but I think there are some things out there that they hope you don't know. One of them is the fact that they don't have to spend this money the way that they've promised. But probably the biggest we hope you don't pay attention to is that it's not $161.5 million. If they can sell those things at 5%, over a 30-year period of time, the cost is $315.5 million. So our children and our grandchildren are not going to be paying off $161 million. They're going to be paying off $315 million. And that is stacked on top of $104 million debt that they already have. Now, some of you in here are in my age category and you're frozen. And I know a lot of people that I hang out with that take the attitude, give them the money, I'm frozen. They can't touch me. I want you to think about that for just a minute. If you're like me, I looked into trying to downsize myself not too long ago and found out that if I sold my house and bought something smaller, I was unfrozen, and now I would have to pay the taxes that were appropriate to the new property. And what I found out was the taxes I was going to pay there were more than the taxes that I'd been paying on a much bigger piece of property. So, if you're sitting in that position, I would encourage you to rethink that. Also, some of you may actually want to sell your home at some time. And if people do their due diligence when they go to try to buy your house, they're going to want to know about the taxes on that piece of property. And it's not going to be your frozen taxes. It's going to be what they would have to pay. It's going to kind of limit your marketability there. They probably don't want you to know that their growth study, that is a 10-year forecast of the growth in this school district, is pretty much fatally flawed at this point. Not only is it old and out of date, but even the superintendent has admitted that our growth has plateaued. We are not growing. We haven't come anywhere near what that projection said we were supposed to be this particular school year. And we see schools all over the North Texas area right now that are closing schools because of reduced populations and those kinds of things. So my probably uninformed opinion is that what has happened in some extent is the growth pattern that they thought was going to take place has changed. Chisholm Trail has brought a change in that, and some of that growth that we thought was going to come right down 377 is going to wind up in Godley and Joshua and Cleburne, not in Granbury ISD. And I was amused by the fact that Godley ISD is trying for a bond election at the same time that we are. And they're touting their bond election on the fact that they're going to have students out of Granbury ISD coming into Godley.
They already do.
They do. Yeah, at this particular point. Now, some of you are sitting here saying, well, if we don't do this, then what are we going to do? I'm going to admit to you there are some needs in the schools. And I think I have a pretty good handle on what some of those needs are. But there are options to consider. And I personally have talked to the architect that they have on board to design the school to try to get him to consider some other methods of construction other than brick and mortar, which would be faster and cheaper. He wants no part of it. We have the administration offices in this district in a building that was an intermediate school just a few years ago. And it was a 9th grade center after that. And then it became the administration office. The board does not want to consider turning that back into a school, even though it would be faster and cheaper than going out and building a brand new school for a population growth that doesn't seem to be happening. There is a building right across the street from the ISD administration office that once the Weatherford College was in. It's sitting there largely empty at this particular point. They're concerned that, we can't split up our administrative staff all over the place. And I don't understand how across the street makes a whole lot of difference. I personally haven't done a lot of this, but I've been out looking for lease property. Right down here at the Triangle in Acton, there's a building sitting down there that's 3/4 empty. Has been for some time. If you ever shopped at Tuesday morning in the old Kroger Center, you know that building is empty. Why cannot we convert the administration office back to a 5th grade center or an intermediate school to take some of the pressure off of the existing elementary schools? You could even leave the superintendent's office and the business office in that building and still get a student body of roughly 500 students in what remains. We've talked about lease space. I don't know enough about the financial inner workings of the district to know where they stand on their fund balance. TEA requires that you maintain a certain amount of fund balance. We have a healthy fund balance. It was enriched somewhat by about $1 million not long ago that came back from the appraisal district that they had overcharged on. You could use some of that fund balance to satisfy some of the needs. So, I think they have awakened to the need to do some things. I'm told that they're going to move the bilingual program out of Bronner out to Bacchus, which is probably a wise move given the enrollments in those various schools. Now, I know that everybody in the administration and probably a bunch of parents would have a screaming fit. But I'm convinced that one thing they need to consider doing is making Bronner and Emma Robinson into one school.
Yep.
Where you don't have Emma Robinson sitting over there with a bunch of empty rooms and Bronner sitting over there chafing for space. It can be done. People say, oh, you have those kids running back and forth across the street. No, that's not who runs back and forth across the street. It's the administration that runs back and forth across the street.
It's good for them.
One of the last points I want to make is there are changes coming, folks, whether we vote for or against this bond election. The governor is pretty certain he's got his votes. And in November, when the new legislators are in office, he's going to call a special session and he's going to pass a voucher plan or a school choice plan. I have historically not been a big fan of the voucher program, but what's going on in Granbury has made me one. Because I think the parents need a greater voice in what's going on in the education of their children, and one way they're going to get it is if they hold the purse strings. So, every study that I've read anything about says that ISDs will lose 10 to maybe 15% of their enrollment the first year that a voucher plan is put in effect. People who have been desperate to get out of the school would use that as their opportunity to get out of there. Now, the ISD is not going to go away. It's going to have to begin to compete. But the ISD is not going to go away, and neither is the debt. Denton ISD right now has built a brand new elementary school that they've announced they will not be able to open it in the fall because they do not have the money to open it. Do we want 3 years from now, when we have a new elementary school, to be told we don't have the money to open it? If you think that's fun, go out and talk to the people in Lipan who had a gymnasium sit there for years and years because they couldn't afford to finish it out. Last point, and then we'll give you a chance to ask some questions if you have some. I have a personal concern about the fact that the voucher passed substantially and the bond failed by the narrowest of margins. What do the teachers know that we don't know? Because if they had voted for the bond election in the same volumes that they voted for the voucher, which gave them a pay raise, it would have passed. All right. That took up a half hour or more of your time. Anybody got a question or comment that you want to make? Yes, sir.
Couple questions. First, real quick, is I find it interesting they talk about that we're not going to increase the tax rate, not increase the tax rate, but they don't tell you what the tax rate would be if it wasn't passed. My understanding is there's a state law that limits how much they can bring in extra revenues. So if the assessments go up, they have to offset that with a decrease in the tax rate. They're not giving you the information you need to make that intelligent decision, which is exactly what they did in the VAT, where they basically tried to imply that the VAT is what was lowering taxes. That's not true. All of their propaganda, they never told you, here's what it would be with VAT, here's what it would be if it doesn't pass. They obscured that completely. And it bothers me, and I call into question their character of people who try and pass things by obscuring details and facts. Present the information honestly and let people decide. Don't slant it your direction in a dishonest way to get the outcome you want.
Anybody else?
Well said.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to go ahead.
I was just gonna say, my understanding that the main tax appraiser they got him when Tarrant County ran him off for some unethical practices. And
Well, you're dealing in an area that I really don't know anything about, but if you say that's true, I'll trust you as much as I do the board, okay?
When Jeremy Glenn was in Waxahachie, he got ran off with much of the same thing of, practice.
Okay. I guess I should have let y'all know this, and I'll let you know now. Two of you have had a chance to speak. This is being recorded, and it is going to show up on various social media sites and what have you. So if you don't want to be on the camera, it may be time to go home. Yes, ma'am. Way in the back.
You mentioned we currently have 104 million in existing debt. What's the forecast for that payoff? And is there additional fees that are not yet included in that 104?
I really don't know the length of that debt at this particular point. Obviously, it's not going to last through the life of this new one if they incur that debt. But the principal owed on it is in the 74 million range, and the interest that's still owed on it puts it at 104 million.
Jerry, it's scheduled to pay off 2039.
2039, somebody from the hallway says.
Wow. And I had a second part, if there's not another question.
Go ahead.
Okay. The comment was made, if we borrow the money at 5%. I'm not a finance expert, but everything I'm seeing in the news is forecasting great increases soon. So what will that do? Let's say hypothetically it passes, there's no restriction on that.
Well, you've been promised that they will not raise the tax rate, but that's only as good as this particular budgetary cycle. And if that happens, if they have to give 6.5% to get that money, you will see a tax rate increase.
So we'll be forced to tax increase.
Yeah.
So, actually, it's $77 million right now as a principal, $28 million in interest as of their August 31st, 2023 financial statement is what they owe now. I've calculated the last 8 years of pay down. They've paid down $40 million in 8 years on that original principal. And in my opinion, the no tax increase is baloney, because yes, it's true, if this bond gets passed in May, it gives the school district a line of credit for $161 million. Until they go out and let the bond, which is sell it, which may take 6 months, it may take a year, there's going to be no increases in the budget cycle because they haven't done anything yet. But when they go sell that bond, they can't tell you what the interest rate's going to be, because the bond measure has to have the interest rate in it if it's locked, and it doesn't have that. So when they let that bond of $161 million, and I'll give you the point, if you go to their own website and look at their interest rates, they passed a bond in November of 2013, $85 million. Their INS rate was 0.105, 10.5 cents. 2 years, that was in 2013. In 2014-15, their INS rate went up to 22.5 cents. So it went up a dime as soon as they let that bond. So that's something else they don't want you to know, is that your your rate will go up when they let that bond. And they can't guarantee you that it won't.
I might point out to you that once they let the bond and it's sold, it's there. They can't decide at that particular point, oops, we're just not going to spend this money. They may not spend the money, but the debt's still there. Yes, sir.
I worked for Merrill Lynch for a good number of years. We stayed out of the school bond business because there's 3 companies in the state of Texas that underwrite bonds. There used to be when I was with Merrill. The thing that people don't know is right off the top of this bond, 5 or 6% of that bond is gonna go to the underwriters. It's gone. That's money that they can't use. The permanent school fund was broke in 2013. Now, it's come back since some of the bonds have been paid off, and I don't know if this bond is gonna be guaranteed by the PSF or not. Something we need to look at. If the PSF doesn't guarantee this bond, we're on the hook.
Anyone else?
I'd like to say something.
Yes, sir.
I've been in construction all my life. Several years back in the late 90s, I don't remember just exactly when it was done. They had a bid out for just repairs. Well, I went in and I turned in a bid. Ended up being low bid. Somebody got it in Dallas, it's 3.8 times higher than ours. They're not honest at all.
Well, there was obviously something wrong with you.
Not enough kickback.
I'm very successful with it.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make a statement. I live in Granbury, well, in the administration building, I was one of the classes, I'm going to tell my age here, in sixth grade, that building, I was the very first class that was in that building, okay? And I don't understand why administration was able to go in there and reconstruct that, and 38 people were able to go in there and redo that building and make it all pretty and all this stuff. I've heard all these rumors about how beautiful it is and everything, and actually, yeah, it is quite nice in there, because I went in to buy season passes this year for the Pirates. So it is actually really nice how they done it in there for their 38 people that have their offices in here. So, you know, I don't understand how we spent all that money for that vanity for those 38 people, but y'all have buses that have 250,000 miles on them that are constant breaking down, that the kids' safety is not important. So, and there's, that accidents are happening with our kids getting hurt because of those buses, because they're constantly breaking down, or the seats aren't attached to the bus, because, you know, the floors and the bolts and the things, and y'all have no idea of the stories I've heard from these some of the bus people.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the buses,
And
because
I mean, and I do know, because I checked into it. I was a hospital CEO over 30 hospitals, and for 25 years. And I understand this more than a lot of people, like you were talking about. I understand the capital equipment issues and the things and the maintenance and all of the. And I looked at this and I was like, who does this? This is crazy. Because I looked at this forecast and I was like, I couldn't understand it. It was, the numbers didn't even make any sense. I'm like, what CFO, who does this mess? I mean, I'm sorry, and if I'm making fun of somebody, I apologize. But I just didn't understand it, because but anyway. But the buses, yes, you said something about the buses.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm glad you brought them up,
the
because
safety of our kids here in Granbury obviously is not important to this Mr. Glenn, because our kids are not important. And I don't think the parents of Granbury know what their kids are riding in, because their kids are not safe in these buses. They have too many miles on them, they're breaking down. They have to tow buses in constantly. And you know what? They are not even DPS. Their mechanics are the ones that are inspecting those buses, not the DPS. Their mechanics are doing that.
Well, I'm not sure that the DPS gets into the business of inspecting school buses, but I am glad you mentioned the school buses because I forgot to make a point. They want 30 new school buses. I'm not going to tell you, it is perfectly legal for them to buy those buses with bond money. Nothing illegal about it at all. But I personally do not know any school administration that ever bought school buses with bond money because school buses don't last 30 years.
Right.
And passenger vehicles don't last 30 years. So if you buy those things that are gone before the debt is expired, you're just stacking debt upon debt.
I'd like to add something to her point. If you look at Granbury's financial statements, revenues into the district were about $60 million in 2017, 2018. In 2023, 2024, they're going to be over $93 million. Revenues have increased 53% over the past 6 years, while enrollments increased about 13%. Why isn't there enough money to buy the damn buses? Exactly. The revenues are going through the roof. 53% increase in 6 years. Is your income going up 53% in 6 years? I'd be embarrassed if I was on the administration asking for another increase after people to show you've got all this money coming in. Why do you need more? It's never enough.
That should be part of your yearly operational costs.
Amen.
It's budget for buses.
Yes, ma'am.
Many areas across the country have experienced growth. And as a community grows, and this is one of the things that the school is saying, we're growing, so we need these schools. Well, if you're looking at a school, the need for a school in your growth, you have to also look at the other community needs, infrastructure, water plants, sewer plants. As we go, what are we doing with septic systems, things like this? And there's been people, or not people, but communities that have been buried by bonds for one issue and find themselves without the funds or the ability to raise another bond for another item, hospital, water infrastructure, everything else, and they're hindered by it, and they're just at a loss. They somebody mentioned Waxahachie. They are bond scared. They do not want another bond. They're buried with the school that they have there, and they have many other infrastructure needs. And I would hate to see Granbury fall into that same situation because we already have water issues. The whole state of Texas has water issues. And these are things that we need to look at for the community that includes these students as well as families of the community.
I'm going to make one final comment. And then,
So I would say that I was in a meeting, with a meet and greet for the school board, and it was with the ones that got elected. I don't remember their names, I don't care. But that's just me. Well, I was in that meeting, and that Barbara Harrington, who's still president, told me that it takes 18 months to get a school bus.
Yes.
So that's something we need to look at. So if they want 30 school buses, we'll still be trying to get school buses while we're still paying on this bond 50 years from now. So that's something else that needs to be looked at. You're gonna get this money for 30 school buses, but yet you're not gonna get them for 30 years. So, approximately. So, it's something to look at.
yes, ma'am.
I have a question. You talked about monument building and resume building. Can you just go into a little bit more detail for other people who might not know what you're...
Well, monument building is, we build a school, I get my name on it. And personal opinion, I would never name a school after a person ever again. There's nothing wrong with calling it Acton or Mambrino or Oakwood or what have you. You know, I have to wonder what the Willie Copeland, Crossland, yeah, Willie Crossland, what his family must think about the fact that his name was on the building and then it got taken off. So you just open up a whole big old can of worms when you start naming schools. Heaven knows you might name one after George Washington and then you would have to take it down. Now, resume enhancement. That usually is pointed at the superintendent because you build your credibility or your resume by passing a bond election. Because school districts, obviously our superintendent, and he is looking, there's no secret to that. He's been on the final list of at least one school district that I know of for being hired. But but this is not unique here. This is what superintendents historically do, is that they're looking for the next biggest step. And you get there by building your resume, and passing a bond election is a big resume enhancement. I'm going to make one closing comment, and then we're going to go home.
Jerry, can I need about 5 minutes at the end of this.
Okay.
I have a super quick question. We're new to the district, and so you were talking at the very beginning about soft costs. So I'm just curious to know if you know what they might be used for, and how much you're talking about.
Well, I know what they've put in the budget for soft costs, and it's in this bond budget, it's $14,300,000 and some odd thousand. No, I can't tell you what those soft costs are going to be because they don't know. I give you an example of why you need contingency. This church is living proof of it. We built a portico on the north side of the building. You had to drill some piers to support it. We struck water. We didn't know that it was there. So we had to spend some soft cost money on somebody to come in and assess where that was and what have you. So you need some. I just don't know that you need 20% of this bond election designated for contingency and soft cost. Steve, you want to take your 5 minutes before I say my last word?
I do.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. I know we've talked about the bond, but what about math and reading scores? What about the actual achievement of students? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, would that I knew enough to really comment on it, but if I wade into that, I'd be wading into some area which I really haven't looked at.
Okay, that's fine.
Maybe that's an indictment of administrators. They're not too concerned about those kinds of things. Steve.
All right, first, what are we going to do? He's going to close it up, but first, aren't we just really, really grateful to have this man that knows this stuff? So everybody knows I use a hammer to make my point, so buckle up. First off, myself and a few other people in this room went to the Yes Bond meeting, and I sat face to face with Barbara Harrington saying, convince me what you need. I want to know. She said, this won't be the first one, Steve. We'll be back for 2 more. They had said that. They want that $494 million, folks, that we said no 2 years ago. So they're coming back. They are. So there's no secret. I have been in a room where Jeremy Glenn was smoozing people and saying, we love Granbury ISD. My kids we love it here. And he had sent out 2 resumes that week. So understand this. Jeremy Glenn, and he's going to dance around it, he is legacy kingdom building. The people in Waxahachie are glad he's gone, and the people in Granbury will be glad when he's gone. Right. Folks, we cannot put up with this anymore. When 5 administrators are making almost $1 million down there in that 75,000 square foot building, that is wrong. When we're riding on bad buses and that kind of stuff. So what do? First, the Republican Party's come out and said 13-4, we're going to fight this. 4 people voted not to fight this. That's on their back, not ours. Find your precinct chair. Find out who's in charge of your precinct. Get involved because we're throwing money at it and other people are too. And I'm going to introduce you to the pack here in a second. Second, I did this when I ran. I encouraged Melanie, other people to do this. I said find 2 people and take them to the polls. Find 5 people. You guys find 5 people and take them to the polls and say enough of this, people. Third, there's a pack. Denny Malman is right here. He's got the pack. You're going to come up for a second, Denny, when you're done. Introduce himself. Let him know what the pack name is. It takes money to fight this, folks. If you don't think they're getting outside money with all these yes signs and everything else, it's coming. The campaign for no is coming. Trust me, understand it, it's coming. Let Denny come up and introduce himself out front. When you check it, when you move it, leave, there's a sign-up sheet. We need to stay in contact. The Browns are out there. Get your name and information on that. Denny.
Thank you, Steve. So I was appointed treasurer by a group that's been formed called the Granbury Families Pact, and our mission is to oppose this bond. Yes, you've seen yes signs out there. You're about to see all kinds of no signs out there. We have raised $13,000 plus thus far and spent almost all of it on signs and banners that are being deployed beginning today. We will need more funding to fight this thing effectively. If you would like to make a contribution, I can give you an address. I also have the Square app. I can deposit directly to our account if you have a card that I can swipe or touch. Ready to, well, we need your assistance.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Sign up up front. Sign up.
Good. Thank you, Jim.
All right, I promise you, last comment, and then I'm going home. That is that I am convinced that if the board would take the opportunity to turn that administration building back into a school, that it would be cheaper and quicker, because it's going to take, from the day you pass this bond, 3 years before you'll put a student in a school built by that. Now, if we have such an almighty need for space, why do these kids have to wait for 3 years? Because if they would do this, they would only have to wait next year. Unfortunately, if the board had decided to make this move after the bond failed in November, they could have expedited it and they could have had that back in use by the beginning of next school year. Too late to do that now. But the year following, it could be there and we would not have a lot of these needs unaddressed. Y'all have a good evening. Appreciate you being here.